Hello, guys. Welcome to Psyched Minds. If you have not subscribed yet to the channel, do subscribe, like, and share. We are reading Ordinary People by Judith Guest, Chapter 26. On Sunday at breakfast, his grandmother asks, "What time did you get in?" He knows that she knows. The light was on in their bedroom when he pulled into the drive off. As he came up the stairs, I don't know, 12, 12:30? 1:30, she says. 1:30 then. He nods amiably, helping himself to the toast she has kept warm for him in the oven. The small breakfast nook is washed in sunlight. Sun glints off the jar of honey sitting on the table, filtering through the pale yellow curtains at the window. His head sinks with an intricate, melodic line. Telemann? Marais? John Bull? He cannot remember, but he loves those fresh and unfamiliar instruments. The recorder, the harpsichord, their simple statement of truth. He wonders what the weather is like in Dallas. Sunny, he hopes, warm. How can you expect to get a decent night's sleep coming in at that hour? She's frowning across the table at him. I give up. How can I? She sighs. Everything is a joke with you, isn't it? Grandmother, you know something. I'm nuts about you, he says cheerfully. You're always agitating. I think it's great. You ought to run for president. No kidding. He gets to his feet, pushing the chair back. Where are you going? Outside to wash my car. Well, don't get chilled. It's not summer, you know. I know. It's a perfect day. The temperature is in the 50s. It threatens to break a record. And tonight he will go to Giannini's to study. 7:30. Thinking about it makes his skin ripple pleasantly. His stomach pull. A feeling you get going up in an elevator. Shouldn't plan ahead like this. Shouldn't expect minutes, hours, and the elevator comes down. You could hit the ground, but what a trip. Last night he took her out again. The old Saturday night show date. Afterward, at Lombardi's, they had run into Phil Truan and Shirley Day. Phil had talked about the four of them going bowling sometime, and Jen had said, "Oh, I'm a terrible bowler. Ask on." And Phil had said, "Hey, so am I. Ask on." And suddenly he was the authority figure. Although he does not remember Truan being a bad bowler, he was probably just being nice, making him feel important. Juan is a nice guy, that is the truth. He would like to do something with him again. He liked the look of Janine and Shirley, leaning towards each other across the table, the peach silk river flowing towards Shirley's dark curls. Everything looked washed and new this morning. The concrete, wet from melting snow, smells clean. The soap sharply pungent, the water cold as it runs over his head, and another truth, that there are no secret passages to strength, no magic words. It is just something you know about yourself. Since last night, no, before last night, it is as if he knew it all along. He's strong, he's able, because he is. After dinner, he and his grandfather sit in the living room reading the Sunday paper, while in the kitchen his grandmother does the dishes. He listens to the confronting sound of her bustling about, the cupboard doors banging loudly, the water going on and off with that peculiar groaning wail as the pipes protest, another memory that belongs to this old and comforting house. He waits patiently for the sports section. His grandfather reads every article, chuckling, rattling the paper at the stuff he likes, grumbling and crossing his legs when something annoys him. He leaves through his section casually, reading a dull article on riverfront housing investment from beginning to end, testing his memory. He checks out his horoscope, home, family, your lifestyle are spotlight, Taurus and Libra individual figures prominently. He wonders about his lifestyle. What is it? He's becoming, Burgess says. An article halfway down on page 3 suddenly leaps out at him. Girl takes her own life. Oh God. He skips to the middle of it. Carbon monoxide poisoning. 19-year-old Skokie girl dead in her car early Saturday morning. She had been reported missing the night before by her father Raymond Aldrich. He goes back to the beginning of the article. Karen Susan Eldridge of 3133 Celeste Skokie, Illinois, dead on arrival at Skokie's General Hospital. Hose attached to the car's exhaust pipe was drawn through a rear window. His body suddenly numb. The words thicken and swim before his eyes. Oh God, oh no, oh God. His head fills with strange sounds, a tuneless humming like violin strings. His body trembles. We are in shock. Father told reporters, everything going so well. I can't believe. I don't believe it. He folds the newspaper carefully, holds it carefully on his lap. Rocking slowly, he is dizzy and sick at his stomach. Conrad, what's the matter? His grandfather stands over him, the newspaper in his hand. Are you all right? I am all right, he says. He can hardly hear himself. The sound inside his head are so loud. His grandmother is there, and there is more talking. Broken pieces of conversation that he cannot follow. Her hand is on his forehead. You don't feel hot to me. Is it a headache? A headache, yes, he says, getting up. I need to go to bed. I'm tired. Let me get you the aspirin, she says. Never mind, I don't need it. He heads for the stairway, holding himself stiffly upright. In his mind, he sees himself putting his feet, one before the other, on the steps, carrying himself upward. His body feels nothing. Fully awake, he lies on his side in the bed, memorizing the lines of the desktop, and above it, the half-inch ridge of desk pad, the chair beside the desk, the precise angles of his school books piled upon the chair. His eyelids feel dry and scratchy. So safe, floating in the calmest of seas. What happened? What happened? A stone bench outside the hospital where they sat for hours soaking up spring and its sunshine. Leo with them laughing and joking, Karen's legs swinging back and forth, and the blue cotton dress clings to her slim body. Her hair long and black, freshly washed, shines flatly against her skull, smiling at him. A dimple appears in her cheek. What happened? What happened? Crawford, you liar, you promised you said you were never wrong. Oh, Jesus, God, please, I don't want to think about this. Let me sleep. God, let me sleep. Eyes closed, a knee in his back and at his neck, forcing his face into the floor of the elevator, rough under his cheeks, smell of vomit and matted fur. God, don't hurt me. Struggles against the indignity, his pajamas pulled down around his knees, a needle sunk deep into his thigh, twists, moans, and all of it loose like water, flowing salt tickles inner edges of his eyes, into his mouth, twist into his back arms over his head. Raw wails of anguish break off in pieces, hurt his ears. Baby, it's okay. Leo is over him, lifts coaxing. Let's get up off the floor, huh? Arm around his waist, sags heavily, his wrist aches. Where Leo holds him, dragged along the watery dark, he rolls off Leo's shoulder to the bed, eyes closed, hands folded in prayer. Between his legs, can't look. God, don't hurt me, please. Shock. His mind egg-shaped, grey, loose, tracing of parts over it, rat scratching white hospital gown, gentle Leo. Leo helps him into it. It never hurries him. Old friends in the steel and white room greet him with smiles. Here, he's just lie back and relax, head on the pillows. That's it. Get him ready, shoot him up so he can't move, can't get away. Leo smiles down at his face, is purple. In the light, his teeth glitter. Easy now, you know it doesn't hurt. No, but afterward, exhaustion, fatigue that moves outward from the center of him, flowing like warm oil in his veins. Can't lift arm or leg, his ear rings, his head light and empty, all rat scratching erased, and Leo feeds him. Atta baby, eat some peaches. His body jerks awake. His hand reaches for the lamp. He turns it on, lies motionless in the sudden bright light. He's in the narrow, twin bed in his grandmother's spare bedroom. Blue bedspread, blue and white striped wallpaper, blue and white rag rug on the floor. Everything in order. No good. No good to think about it. About anything. it will not change. Just as before it is done, he will he wills his mind to drop him under, to let him pass through into dreamless sleep. Sits against the wall, cool at his back in only his shorts, the door locked, testing, only testing tension of skin, sharpness of blade, thin threads of blood well up from scratches. His legs, his arms have no feelings in them, draws the blade down into his left wrist, a deep vertical cut. The artery bubbles up like a river widens. Does it again to his right arm, warmth and color floods the room. He is free at last, comforted. It crosses his mind to compose himself, for dying of awkward. There is nowhere to put his hand. The blood makes everything slippery. Lies on his side using one arm as a pillow. He sleeps, and then arm side his jaw aches something. Heart pinches his mouth between his teeth to keep him from swallowing his tongue. They say he knows better. It is how they punish you for failure here. And someone crying, crying, Lord, what has he done? What has he done to himself? He awakens to fear again, his mouth dry for terror filled seconds. He doesn't know if it has happened all over again, or worse, that time has tipped backward and it is happening still. Numb with fear, he scrambles out of bed, pulling his clothes on over his pajamas. The house is dark. It hovers around him as he fumbles for the stairway, fumbles for his jacket in the downstairs hall closet, quietly feeling for the handle of the front door to let himself out. He walks swiftly without direction to calm himself, to get away from dreams, because there are worse ones and he doesn't want to remember them. Doesn't want to think at all. Less intense, but how to do it? To concentrate on that is to at once accomplish the opposite. A phrase attaches itself to his mind. Why a kid would want to hurt himself? A swift sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach as he remembers another newspaper article about him. The police chief was quoted. He couldn't understand why a kid would want to hurt himself like that. Crawford had let him read it afterward. He had tried to explain that he had not been trying to hurt himself, he had merely been trying to die. No, you do not slash yourself in a dozen places if you are merely trying to die. Nor do you overlook the full bottle of Valium beside the razor blades in the medicine chest. Not for him that quiet. Dream drifted, rode upward on sleeping pills, too easy and too neat. Oh God, why then? He stops walking. The sidewalk is shadowy, the air around him still and cold. Stiff black limbs arc over his head. The black houses crouch, ready to spring. He's shivering, his skin clammy and wet underneath his pajama top, down his back, under his armpit, freezing out there. Ahead of him, a car approaches. It pulls the curb opposite him, police car. The door opens and he has a sudden urge to run. Swiftly, he puts it down. He stands still, shoving his hands into his jacket pocket as the cop crosses the street. Where you headed? Nowhere. He wets his lips nervously. Just taking a walk. Pretty late, isn't it? After 2. Where do you live? 1430, Heron Drive. He is surprised at how calm, how normal his voice sounds. The cop frowns. Long way from home, aren't you? He has given his home address. He takes his hand out of his jacket pocket, lets them hang limp at his sides. See, I'm harmless. I'm okay. I'm staying with my grandparents on Green Bay Road. Where do they live? For a moment, he panics. He cannot remember the number and he stumbles over the words. It's a grey house with black shutters on the corner of the Green Bay and Booth, 5135. What's the name? Butler. Howard Butler. Yeah, okay. The cop smiles then. I know the house. They know you are out? He shakes his head. His hands are sweating. His wallet is back on the dresser in the bedroom. Suppose they should ask him to prove who he is. Will they take him to the station? Call his grandparents? What's your name? Jarrett. Conrad Jarrett. Well, listen, Conrad. I wouldn't walk around here this late. Too many nuts in the world these days. You want a ride back? No, that's okay. You would better head back then. They might wake up, be worried about you. Yeah, I will. They drive off. He lets his breath out slowly, even manages a wave as they signal to him from the car window. Too many nuts, meaning you aren't one of them. All the outer signs must be right then. Hair cut to the right length, polite answers, expensive suit jacket made in Mexico. You are all right, kid. Ordinary. And this event, walking the streets at 2 o'clock, is ordinary too. But something is wrong about it, something not normal. What is it? He cannot remember. He's shivering again. He wipes his hands on his pants, zip his jacket up tight. Turning, he follows the disappearing tail lights, two red eyes in the darkness. The door is unlatched as he left it. He slips quietly inside, goes to the kitchen, to the sink where he hunts in darkness for the faucet and a glass. He drinks greedily and then lets the cold water run over his hand. Still in the dark, he makes his way to the den at the back of the house. No lights. He doesn't want to wake them. No going back to bed either. Not safe there. He sits upright in the chair besides the door, his arm along the armrest, not leaning back. Unforgivable. It is unforgivable. They wrestle with the boat together, the sail snapping like riffle, cracks in the wind. Get it down, get the goddamn sail down. Grabbing at Grey, a billowing mass sticky and wet against his face, it smothers him with its weight, a loud crack, and the terrible rolling begins, everything out from under the water closing over his head. He fights his way back to the surface, screaming, emptied of everything but fear. Buck! Buck in front of him, a hand stretching out, an arm along the upturned hull, water crashing against him, pushing them apart. Buck yells, "Kick off your shoes!" Mindless, he obeys, chokes. As water closes him off again, from the moon, from everything, they collide in the water. Buck grabs his shirt. "Hang on, I'm going to go under, have a look." He screams at him. "Don't go, don't go!" And the wind takes it, throws it back into his face. Buck is already gone, and above him the sky, lumpy with cloud black. It is painful to breathe, terrifying. He must turn his head away from the dark shape of the hull from safety. To do it, Buck ass over his. Buck surfaces behind him, shaking hair from his eyes, gasping, "We screwed up this time, buddy. He's going to haul ass over this." They stare at each other and Buck breaks into a grin. "Well, you got any ideas?" He shakes his head, biting his lips to keep back the terror. "Always thinking, aren't you?" And he finds his voice then. It's not so goddamn funny, Buck." He soothes him. Okay, they'll be looking for us. They're looking now, for sure. Just hang on, don't get tired. Promise? He says. "Don't you either." And they stop talking, then address themselves to the dull, dogged task of enduring, and the clouds level out. It starts to rain hours into the night. They hang, two fish caught and strung off the sides of the boat, arms straining, hands numb with the cold. The water is icy, laced with foam like root beer. "How long you think it's been?" "I don't know, an hour? 2 hours? Oh, well, longer than that, don't you think?" When did it happen? When did they stop? Calling to one another from opposite sides of the stern where they hung for better, more even balance. Did he think it was over? "Man, why did you let go?" "Because I got tired." "The hell, you never get tired. Not before me, you don't. You tell me not to get tired. You tell me to hang on and then you let go." "I couldn't help it." "Well, screw you then." Unforgivable. And his grandmother crying at the funeral. Poor Jordan. Poor baby. He didn't want to do it. He didn't want to leave us like this. And he had answered her, saying coldly, "Why did he let go? Then why didn't he hang on to the boat?" And he was punished for that, because afterward everything made him ill. Food and the sounds of people eating it, crushing, breaking, slurping, smells. He would lift a glass of orange juice to his mouth, inhale the acrid odor of dirt and dying flowers. Even to think about eating made him gag, and for weeks afterwards, not being able to sleep, that was punishment too. Being forced to submit over and over to a hopeless rerun of that day, of what could have been done to make the sum of it different. Nothing. That is the nature of hell, that it cannot be changed, that it is unalterable and forever. Was it painful? He cannot believe so. If it was, he would have cried out. He would have known it. And he could have stopped him. He could have said, Buck, take me with you. I don't want to do this alone. He's awake again. No more, no more. He gets up quickly, goes to turn on the television set. Kneeling beside it as it warms up, an old set. The images are snowy. Brightness hurts his eyes. He tunes the sound down and goes back to the chair, focusing his eyes in concentration on the screen. His hands smooth the worn denim of his Levi's, methodically as tears fill his eyes, run down his cheeks. He feels a sudden chill prick as they drop from his chin to onto his jacket. Nearly morning now. Outside the window he can see faint streaks of light spreading, separating the trees from their background of sky. 30 already. 6:30 already. On the television a sunrise semester course in astronomy. Soon the light inside the room will match the grayness on the screen. He gets up again to go to the bathroom, taking a leak, washing his hands, staring at himself in the mirror. He can barely make out the contours of his face. His heart is pounding slow and full, keeping time with the cracking headache that has ignited behind his eyes. He leaves the bathroom, going to sit in the hallway beside the telephone. It will be 7 soon. People get up. Then it is not too early to call. He looks up the number in the book. On Judson Avenue in Evanston, his home number. Waiting, he stares at the faded wallpaper, a pattern of eagles and stars in gold and blue and dull red. As he traces it with his eyes, another pattern emerges. Wings and talons. A sideways stripe across the wall. It begins to move and his stomach heaves. He quickly dials the number. It is Berger's voice at the other end. Hello, this is Conrad, he says. Tears blind him. His throat closes up. Conrad, are you there? I need to see you, he whispers. Yes, okay. Can you make it to the office in half an hour? Come in through the back. The front doesn't open up until 8. I'll prop it for you. All right. He replaces the receiver, goes upstairs for his wallet and his keys. He scribbles a note to his grandparents, leaving it on the telephone stand. Had to leave early. See you tonight after school. The writing looks stiff and jerky to him. Nearly light as he gets into the car, he wipes his eyes, wipes his hand on his pants again. This is how people get in an accident. Keep calm, keep calm. He grips the wheel tightly, his wrist aching, his head throbbing as the grayness around him washes away to chilly March sunshine. It is thin without power. A huge truck, gears grinding, lurches past on the Aidens, and he fights the panic that engulfs him, trying to think of nothing but the mechanics of driving. Now a red light, now stop, now watch the car in front of you. Turning left, it feels like the very first time he has been behind the wheel. He tries to stay in his own lane, tries not to swerve, to keep his foot on the gas constant and even. He focuses his eyes carefully on nothing but the road ahead. That brings us to end of chapter 26. Chapter 27. The light is on and he pushes the door open. He stands a moment in the waiting room. You made good time? He moves to the doorway. Berger is in the corner filling the coffee pot. He says over his shoulder, you gonna come in and sit down? Outside the window, down below, a truck rattles slowly up the street. He's fumbling for the zipper on his jacket, but he cannot find it. There are pockets of tears behind his eyes. His throat aches. He stands motionless in the doorway. It might help if you just let it out, Con. Not the words, but the use of his name that releases him. And he comes slowly forward to sit in front of the desk. The tears roll down his cheeks. I need something. Okay, Berger says. Tell me. But old and powerful voices slam into him. He covers his face. He's back in the hospital again. Back in B ward the night of the burning Robbie Clay, his friend, a bachelor, certified public accountant, the joker always laughing his sister had committed him. First I was a certified public now I'm publicly certified. That night no jokes, no laughter, but an agony of sounds. The roaring of a bull. Robbie had burned himself with matches, a rag tied around his waist soaked in alcohol. Where had he gotten it? Nobody knew. They knew only that he had hurled himself into the void. It could happen to any of them. It lay like a disease over the floor. The nurses walking by, talking late that night, they passed his room. He heard the words penis, scrotum, and thigh, and a wave of dizziness, nausea, sleep sweeping over him. He had gone to stand facing the corner of his room, hands on the wall, and Leo had found him. Baby, he's okay. You don't have to worry about Robbie. He had snarled. Stay the hell away from me. But Leo would not. He was the only one who could get close when he was begging loudest to be left alone, laid his hand on his back. It isn't bad. He's going to be fine. But of course, he wasn't fine. Moved that night up to 3 and never seen again. Buck, Robbie, Karen, everyone he touches, he has a sudden vision of himself naked, tied down on a table, his penis, scrotum, thigh cut away. I can't, he cries. I can't. He drops his head on his arm. You keep at me, make me talk about things I can't talk about. I can't. Is that what you came here to tell me? He lifts his head, holding himself tight. Control. Control is all. He tries to clamp his throat shut over it, to stifle the sound, but he cannot, and he begins to sob. A high, helpless, coughing sound. There is no control anymore. Everything is lost, and his body heaves, drowning. His head is on his arms again, the smell of old woods in his nostril, the warmth of his own breath against his face. Ah, God, I don't know. I don't know. It just keeps coming. I can't make it stop. Don't then. I can't. I can't get through this. It's all hanging over my head. What is hanging over your head? I don't know. He looks up, dazed, drawing a deep breath. I need something. I want something. I want to get off the hook. For what? He begins to cry again. For killing him. Don't you know that? For letting him drown. And how did you do that? Berger asks. But it is coming from some part of him that is separate and unknown. He is helpless against it. Hits his fist hard against the desktop. I don't know, I just know that I did. Head cradled on his arm again, he sobs. Cannot think. No way out of this endless turning and twisting. Hopeless. You were on opposite side of the boat, Berger says. So you couldn't even see each other, right? He nods his head as he sits up. He scratches his cheek, staring at Berger through the slits of his eyes. The itching creeps downward under his pajama top. And he was a better swimmer than you. He was stronger. He had more endurance. Yes. So what is it you think you could have done to keep him from drowning? Tears flood his eyes again. He wipes them roughly away with his hand. I don't know. Something. It is always this way. His mind shuts down. He cannot get by this burden, so overpowering that it is useless to look for a source, a beginning point. There is none. You don't understand, he says. It has to be somebody's fault. Or what was the whole goddamn point of it? The point of it, Berger says, is that it happened. No, that's not it. That is too simple. Kiddo, let me tell you a story, Berger says. A very simple story about this perfect kid who had a younger brother, a not so perfect kid, and all the time they were growing up, this not so perfect kid tried to model himself after his brother, the perfect kid. It worked too. After all, they were a lot alike, and the not so perfect kid was a very good actor. Then along came this sailing accident, and the impossible happened. The not so perfect kid makes it. The other kid, the one he has patterned his whole life after, is not so lucky. So where is the sense in that, huh? Where is the justice? There isn't any, he says dully. Berger holds up his hand. Wait a second, let me finish. The justice obviously is for the not so perfect kid to become that other perfect kid. For everybody. For his parents and his grandparents, his friends, and most of all, himself. Only that is one hell of a burden, see? So finally, he just decides he can't carry it. But how to set it down? No way. A problem without a solution. And so, because he can't figure out how to solve the problem, He decides to destroy it. Berger leans forward. Does any of this make sense to you? I don't know, he says. I don't know. It's a very far out act of self preservation. Do you get that, Con? And you were right. Nobody needs you to be Buck. It's okay to just be you. I don't know who that is anymore, he cries. Yeah, you do, Berger says. You do, Con. That guy is trying so hard to get out and he's never going to be the one to hurt you. Believe me. Let him talk. Let him tell you what you did that was so bad. Listen, you know what you did? You hung on, kid. That's it. That is your guilt. You can live with that, can't you? He cannot answer, does not have an answer. He leans back against the chair. He feels as if he's seeing Berger through a curtain of mist. The air shimmers between them. He is light-headed, his bones fragile without substance, like scraps of paper. The thing that hurts you, Berger says, is sitting on yourself, not letting yourself connect with your own feelings. It is screwing you up, leading you off on chases that don't go anywhere. You get any sleep last night? He shakes his head. How about food? You had anything to eat since yesterday? No. He starts to say that he's not hungry, that he's too tired to eat, but Berger is on his feet and heading for the door, and he stumbles along behind him, unable to voice a protest, down the stairway and out into the street, dragged along by the force and flow of Berger's monologue. Geez, if I could get through to you, kiddo, that depression is not sobbing and crying and giving vent. It is plain and simple. Reduction of feeling. Reduction, see? Of all feeling, people who keep stiff upper lips find that it's damn hard to smile. The restaurant is called Nick's. The lettering is spread in red block letters. Across the front window, it has a dirty, neglected look about it, but inside it is clean and warm and cheerful. Berger picks out a table by the window. He pushes back the blue and white checked curtain so they can look out onto the street. He orders for them both orange juice, toast, bacon, and eggs. He spreads his napkin across his lap, looking around, smiling at everyone. The two plump, dark-haired waitresses, Nick in the kitchen, a table of burly geeks. Conrad sits in the chair, hands between his legs. He's exhausted, his eyes swollen and tight. He looks down at his hands, at his fingernails, bitten to the quick again. He doesn't remember doing that. Narrowing his eyes, he blends everything to grey. The curtains, the walls painted with huge atomic grapevines, and leaves the dark gorilla-like man across the table from him. The little girl in Skokie is what started all this, am I right? Berger asked quietly. Crawford called me last night. He was pretty shook too. Oh God, he says. Berger hands him his handkerchief. Kiddo, you know the statistics. Out of every 150 are going to try it again. 15 eventually make it. He had thought himself empty of tears, but without warning they start up again. He covers his face with his hands. Don't, he says. The waitress brings their breakfast and he blows his nose, then props his elbow on the table. She was okay, he says. She was fine. Into everything at school and happy. She told me to be less intense and relax and enjoy life. It isn't fair. You are right. It isn't fair, Berger says. I'm sorry. I'm damn sorry for her. The poor kid. Crazy world, or maybe it's just a crazy view we have of it. Looking through a crack in the door, never being able to see the whole room, the whole picture. I don't know. He runs his hand through his hair. Listen, eat, he says. You will feel better once you eat. But he is too exhausted to eat. He takes a few tentative bites of the eggs, pushes the plate from him. No go. Too risky. Come on, Berger urges. I can't, he says. His legs feel as if they are weighed to the floor. I don't know what I would have done if I could have gotten you this morning. I couldn't have gotten you this morning. I felt so shaky. And now, he closes his eyes. Still shaky. Berger laughs. That's what I like about you, kiddo. You got style. Listen, What happened this morning was that you let yourself feel some pain. Feeling is not selective. I keep telling you that. You can't feel pain, you aren't going to feel anything else either. And the world is full of pain. Also, joy, evil, goodness, horror, and love. You name it, it's there. Stealing yourself off is just going through the motions, get it? He opens his eyes to study the ceiling, too tired to comment, even to think of a comment. Go home and get some sleep. You look whipped. I can't. My grandmother would hassle me all day. I can't take the flack. She might even call my father and tell him I cut school. So go to your own house. You've got a key, haven't you? He sits up. Yeah, I do. I should have thought of that. Berger laughs again. You would have. When are your parents due back? Not until Wednesday. Okay, go home, rest up, eat something here. Should I come tomorrow for my appointment? Sure. It's okay for me to go, you think? What do you mean? You don't think I'll do anything crazy? Like what? Berger asks. Give yourself a haircut or something? You're a big boy. You're not going to punish yourself for something you didn't do. Alright. And anyway, punishment doesn't do a damn thing for the guilt, does it? It doesn't make it go away. And it doesn't earn you any forgiveness. No, he says wearily. So what's the point of it then? Roger walks him into the car. As he gets in, tears well up again behind his eyelids. For so long he has shielded himself from hurt, not letting it be inflicted upon him. Suddenly he is naked, unprotected, and the air is full of flying glass. All his senses are raw, open to wounding. He wipes his eyes. I'll see you tomorrow. Drive carefully. He lets himself in through the kitchen. The air inside is heavy with sweetish odor of too ripe fruit or furniture polish. He goes upstairs to his bedroom, laying his keys and his wallet on the dresser, opening the window slightly. He turns on the shower and strips down, leaving his clothes in a pile on the floor. He gets in, adjusts the water to as hot as he can stand it. He does his best thinking in here. The heat relaxes the clots inside his brain, making the juices flow, and he leans his forehead against the wall, hands behind his back, as the warmth spreads downward from his neck to his shoulder, his buttocks, the back of his knees. He closes his eyes, sees Berger, a confident, sly gorilla, riding a unicycle in a red felt jacket, eating a banana. Berger smiles and waves. Gorilla don't ride unicycles though. The only one he has ever seen sat inside a huge truck tire suspended from a chain in his cage at the zoo. He rocked back and forth, sticking his tongue out at the world, making judgments. He and Buck pondered the primitive intelligence of this gesture. People laugh, but maybe he knows something. Buck said, we wouldn't laugh if he gave us the finger, would we? Guilt is not punishment. Berger said, guilt is simply guilt. A run-in he and Buck had years ago with a clerk in a drugstore. He said they had not paid for 2 comic books. Wouldn't believe them. He had threatened to call their father and expose them to the world as liars and thieves. Go ahead, Buck said, with scorn. My dad knows we don't lie and he knows we don't take things. What do I care what you think? But he, Conrad, had cared desperately and had felt, even as he knew that he was innocent, guilty, and shamed by it. Why? Because it has always been easier to believe himself capable of evil than to accept evil in others. But that doesn't make sense. The clerk in the drugstore wasn't evil, just mistaken. Bad judgment doesn't make you evil. Can he only see these two opposites, good and evil, innocence and guilt? Is it necessary to believe others guilty in order for himself to be proved innocent? There is a way through this, an opening, if only he can find it. He stands very still, letting water sluice over his shoulders and river into the creases of his stomach to his crotch. Come on. No, I changed my mind. Come on, you promised. Why do I always have to go first? They are 8 and 9, the leader and the follower, as always, in the garage that day with the door closed, stuffy and hot in here, and Buck is abruptly disgusted with him. Ah, forget it, big-ass baby. I said you could do it to me after. Buck turns away, tossing the clotheslines to the floor, and as always, with freedom in sight, he opts for prison It is easier to face than Buck's cool contempt. He stands obediently still as Buck ties his hand behind his back. Sits then, as the rope is lashed around his ankles, Buckles pull a handkerchief from his pocket. How can you make me talk if you gag me? And Buck considers. First we torture you, then we make you talk. But he is no longer sure, turns his head, just as Buck discovers you don't need permission when you have the power, forces him back against the cement floor, sprawls across him while he ties the handkerchief around his mouth. It is clean and smells faintly of his father's. Abruptly. For him, the game is over. Terrified, he struggles to free himself, fight the gag, choking a peculiar hollow clanging sound. The garage door opening, a shadow falls across them, a cool breeze entering. What the hell is this? He's pulled to his feet, the ropes roughly loosened, the gag snatched from his mouth. Not relief, but horror as he sees Buck's pants jerked down to his knees, his father's hand cracking across the bare as Buck howls in protest while he stands in helpless terror, waiting for his punishment, only a game, but they had both been playing it. And then his father's anger is mysteriously spent, and he kneels on the garage floor, an arm around Buck's shoulder. Buck is sobbing his head down. Don't you ever do a thing like that again, Bucky. You understand? But I wasn't going to hurt him, Daddy. People get hurt without anyone meaning it, don't you see? For some inexplicable reason, he was left out of this, passed over, his shame and guilt ignored. It must have been too monstrous to mention his crime, his part in it, and so he had to suffer alone. But what for? There is no evil there after all. Just a boy's game, dangerous maybe, but not evil. And not Buck's fault, not his either. Nobody's fault. It happened, that's all. Not so frightening, is it? To believe them both innocent. Oh God. His sinuses are packed with a spongy material. Tears leak out from beneath his eyelids. Resigned, he lets them come as he soaps himself carefully. His arms, his shoulders, and his back. His legs between his legs. He stands and lets the water run over his head. Washing his hair, when he is finished, he gets out, towels himself dry. Slowly and carefully, he turns his arm up to look at the insides of his wrist. In grade school, a girl named Sally Willett sat next to him. She had taken his hand in hers one day, those strong brown fingers tracing the creases in his palm, showing him his lifeline, curving beside the heel of his hand almost to his wrist. A deep and definite mark. He draws a ragged breath, wondering about Karen, about her lifeline. Was it a long one too? Tears of grief this time. Not fair. Not fair. No, but life is not fair always, or sane, or good, or anything. It just is. He hangs up the towels in the bathroom and turns off the light. He puts on clean underwear, picking up his dirty clothes, throwing them down the clothes chute. All the while, the hot, oily liquid seeps out from beneath his eyelids. He continues to blink it back, to wipe it away. Reduction of feeling. At least he is not guilty of that today. He sets the alarm on his clock radio, stripping back the covers on his bed. He climbs in and cleanliness surrounds him. It smells cool and seductive. He rolls to his face and without a sound, without a thought, he sleeps. That brings us to chapter 27's end and chapter 28. The air is balmy and fresh as they sit on the patio. Watching the boys swim, it is too cool this evening for the adults, and besides, Cal is content to sip his martini, savoring the sharp juniper smell of it as it mixes with the heavier perfume of the surrounding air. Magnolia. Around the pool, the stiff, straw-like grass gives off a mossy odor. Ward raises his glass. To your low total the first day. No, Audrey says, to that 30-foot put on the 15th hole. I was poking everybody around me. Hey, that's my brother-in-law. You did look good, Cal, Beth says. He grins at isolated moments. Well, you didn't really expect to win, Ward says. Hell no. But that is the funny part, or maybe not so funny. After Saturday, when he saw that he could do it, that he had a good chance of doing it, he had tightened up. Those three double boogies on easy holes, if he could have dropped a few more lucky puts like the one on the 15th, you didn't expect to win. Maybe that's it. You get what you expect. Why don't we go out and celebrate anyway? Ward asks. How about it? You both like Mexican food? Or we could go to the captain's table, whatever you want. That would be nice, Audrey says. Let's go there. I'll check to see if we need reservations. What time? 9, 10? Whenever you say. Audrey gets up too. I'll put some hamburgers on for the boys. Keep an eye on them, will you? Beth nods, and they are left alone on the patio as Charlie and Kerry splash and shout under the diving board at the opposite end of the pool. Having fun? He asks her. She smiles. Yes, are you? Sure. I'm sorry you didn't win. Me too. But third place is good, Cal. Third place, he says, sipping his drink, is third place. I've been thinking, she says, that we should play more golf together. Maybe our next vacation should be strictly golf. We could go Pinehurst or Myrtle Beach. Sounds great, Cal says. I bet he would like that too. A short silence and then, do you do that deliberately or is it a reflex action? I'm curious. Do what? Insert him into the conversation. Whenever I mention you and I doing something together. I'm sorry, he says. You said vacation. I guess I assumed that you meant him too. I'm surprised that you haven't felt the need to call him since we have been here. I was going to do it tonight. She laughs. It must be hard to grow up when your father is breathing down your neck all the time. I think I would hate it. He gets up, goes to stand near the edge of the pool, watching Charlie tip himself off the end of the board, backward, arms outstretched, screaming, the drowning man bit. He gazes then at the magnolia tree, those pink knots of petals growing eerily in the dusk. Behind him, he hears the patio's door slide open. Ward says, everything all right? 9:30? We have got time for one more round, Fox. I don't think I'll have another, Beth says. I'm going to dress. Nothing fancy, sissy. You look fine just the way you are. The best time of the year to be here. Everything fresh and green. Later on, Audrey told him the sun, the heat bakes everything, people and plants, to a hard nut brown, and you have to stay in out of it. You live the air-conditioned life, pure and perfect and artificial. He turns and hands his glass to Ward, who has come up beside him. I'll have one. Light on the vermouth, okay? Always, always. And again, he lets himself drink too much. Not out of boredom this time, out of anger at her, maybe, out of fear, out of whatever it is that is happening to them that he does not want to see and doesn't see when he's high and feeling good. One more, Ward is gay. When they arrive home, clinking bottles at the bar, he and Audrey giggling together as if they didn't know how they had been used tonight. Intermediaries. She would not look at him all night. They skirted the edges of conversation, shielding themselves from each other, letting Ward and Audrey do the work. Without speaking now, without looking at each other, they sit on opposite sides of the small, cozy living room, the silence between them far from empty. It is hostile, full of unspoken words. From tonight, from before tonight, from who knows how far back, he doesn't. He is sure she doesn't either. But he is sick of the brooding, sick of dwelling, nothing gets spoken, nothing resolved, circles and more circles. There's a bottle in the garage, Ward is saying. Honey, would I let us run out of Tia Maria, knowing how you love it? Yes, you would. I wouldn't, I brought it. I swear this afternoon only I set it on the workbench. Well, get it. You come on with me. No, come on, I've got something else to show you. Ward, you're rotten. But she goes with him, and they are left with the silence. Beth picks up a magazine and leaves through it, and his anger ignites. Why don't we finish it? He asks. She looks up. Finish what? What you started out there tonight. I started? How did I start it? By suggesting we go away together on a vacation. And I didn't stop it either, you did. You were the one who walked away from me, remember? What the hell was I supposed to say to that? The old song and dance, I overprotect, I breathe down his neck. You do? It's a matter of opinion. Right, so there's no point in discussing it further. We never agree. I think there's a point. Why are you so obsessed? She snaps. God, I'm sick of talking and talking and talking about him. He controls you even when he's not around, even when he's 2,000 miles away. Oh, stop it. We haven't exchanged a dozen words about him in months. That isn't the problem. He isn't the problem. Isn't he? No, so let's talk about what's really bothering you. Oh no, let's talk about what is bothering you. That's what you want, isn't it? That's why you go around moping and depressed, just the way you used to, as if it helped, being half alive, dragging everybody else down with you. What the hell are you talking about? I'm talking about last year. Last spring, when you couldn't answer the phone, couldn't open your mail without wondering if it would be the hospital with more bad news. God damn it. Sure, I was depressed, but I wasn't too depressed to go to Europe, was I? I wasn't too depressed to take you to Spain and Portugal. Goddamn Spain and goddamn Portugal. If you're going to quote him, then quote him. I'm not quoting him, I'm quoting myself. He struggles for control, his sense blurred. Important. This isn't important. This is important. Don't screw it up. Don't get off on old song, old dances. I'm asking you to tell me, he says slowly, what I have done that's made you so angry with me. It's not what you have done, she says. It's what you think I have done. What you have done? He lets out the word sink in, trying to get the message. There is no message, nothing coming through. I don't know what you mean. I don't think you have done anything. Oh, you liar, she says bitterly. You do, and you know it. You blame me for the whole thing. For what whole thing? That whole vicious thing. He made it as vicious, as sickening as he could. The blood, all that blood. Oh, I will never forgive him for it. He wanted it to kill me too. And suddenly she is crying. Painful, desperate sobs that shake her shoulder. Her hands are over her face, her head bent to her knees. Bewildered and frightened, he goes to her, kneeling beside the chair, trying to put his arm around her, but she will not permit it. Leave me alone. You got what you wanted. Leave me alone. I don't want any of your goddamn false sympathy. I didn't, Beth. I love you, honey. Please, let me help. He fumbles stupidly at her side, and her head jerks up. She looks at him stiffly, her eyes hard. Help? What do you mean help? I don't need it. Not your kind of help. I can help myself. Carefully she wipes her eyes. Ward and Audrey are standing in the doorway. Hey, Ward says softly. I'm sorry about this. We don't want to butt in. You're not butting in, Beth says. She starts to cry again and Cal stands up, turning away from her, close to tear himself. He goes to the window, looking out at the pool, at the shadows of trees and bushes on the cement. Don't you understand what he was saying? She asks. He was saying, look what you made me do. Why? He asks. Why was he saying that? I don't know. I wish I knew. She sobs and then her voice is calm, more subdued, and she speaks slowly. I just know how people try to manipulate other people. Oh God, Beth, I don't believe that. I don't believe he went all that way to try to manipulate us. What happened? What he did it to himself. Can't you see anything except in terms of how it affects you? No, neither can you. Neither does anybody else. Only maybe I'm more honest than the rest of you. Maybe I'm more willing to recognize that I do it. You are right, she says, her voice low and strained. He didn't do it to you. He only did it to me. I don't know what he wants from me and I have never known. Does he want me to throw away my arms around him when he passes a chemistry exam? I can't do it. I can't respond when someone says, "Here, I just did this great thing, so love me for it." I can't. I don't think he wants that, Cal says. I don't think he just wants to know that you don't hate him. I think he just wants to know that you don't hate him. Hate him? How could I hate him? Mothers don't hate their sons. I don't hate him, but he makes demands on me. He tries to blackmail me. She looks up at him. Where did you get that about my hating him? Did he tell you that about me? Is that what he told you up in his room? Beth, and you let him say that to you? Her voice is trembling. You see how you accept his feelings without question? But you can't do the same for me, can you? Ward moves towards her. Honey, I don't know what you want from me anymore, Cal. I don't know what anybody else wants from me. Everybody. Honey, nobody wants anything from you. What says? We all just want Cal and Con and everybody, we all just want you to be happy. Happy? She looks at him. Oh, Ward, you give us all the definition, will you? But first, you would better check on those kids every day to make sure they are good and safe, that nobody's fallen off a horse or gotten hit by a car or drowned in that swimming pool you're so proud of. Beth, Audrey says, turning her back, her hands to her face. And then you come and tell me how to be happy. He closes his eyes, not listening anymore, letting blackness surround him. Blackness into last year when he stood outside the bathroom door, begging to be let in. No sound. The silence was screaming at him. He didn't want to know, didn't want to believe it was happening. Con, open the door, let me in. His shoulders bouncing, crashing against the door, the jam splintering, giving way to the nightmare of blood, the towels soaked with it, leaking their overflow onto the rug, the floor, his arms curved, hiding his face, a sea fan of dried blood on the wall behind his head. And in the hospital, let me die, his eyes bright with the drugs they had given him, strapped down in the high crib-like bed, his face pale against the green emergency room sheets. I want to die. In shock, watching the bottle upside down in its racks as it drained healing liquid into the arm. In shock, unable to think, already broken by the note they had found on his desk. I wish I knew why, but I just don't. After the accident, after they had towed the boat in, on the way from the dock to the hospital, he had moaned over and over, Mama, I'm sorry. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That second time, there had been no apology. A bloody vicious thing. She's right. It hasn't killed her, but it has done something to her. Something terrible. Circles and more circles. Where does it end? How can it end? That brings us to the end of chapter 28. Chapter 29. The moon cuts from behind a cloud, a flat, pale slice of light. The air smells of darkness, of endless space. As he stands on the porch, an extension of it, and Beth inside reading, Conrad upstairs doing his homework, all extensions of it, space and time, these dimensions that embrace him, control him. This afternoon on the plane, Beth sat, fragile and untouchable beside him, and he had left her alone at last, knowing that if he tried to approach her, she would simply move her seat. Let her move her seat, let her believe what she believes. You cannot change her anyway. You're not God, you do not know, and you are not in control, so let go. He had finished the work he promised Ray he would have done by tomorrow. Conrad teased him when he saw him seated in the den, his books and papers piled around him. The indispensable man, huh? It has made him flinch. Another illusion hits the dirt. This feeling that he has existed in order to understand, to control, to predict. This idea that he was necessary to organizations, to his family, to his wife, to life. All these things including him, they exist all right, but not because of anything. Then are no decisions required? Is there nothing to be done? No actions to be taken? Right. Sit tight. Never confuse movement with actions, says Hemingway. She has been reading him one day. She told him that declaring her agreement with his statement, maybe she won't then, confuse movement with action. Lie back. Don't be hasty. Haste makes waste. He is inundated with Howardism. Suddenly, all true. Those old wrinkled maxims, proverbs, cliches. A rolling stone gathers no moss. Well, who needs moss anyway? Oh hell, he is abruptly disgusted with himself. Do not clutch so at things, it is useless. Useless. And do not be paralyzed. It is better to move than to be unable to move, because you fear loss so much. Loss of order, loss of security, loss of predictability. Better sometimes not to know what to expect, like tonight at dinner. She was perfect. The perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect hostess. Conrad picked the restaurant, Naroff's, the small Italian place in Highwood, and Conrad did all the talking while she and Cal listened, quietly, attentive. Once she reached out to pull the collar of his shirt from under the neck of Conrad's black pullover, and he sat, not moving under her touch, but drinking in every ounce of her attention, knowing that mysteriously he had done something right tonight. Maybe just walking in the door and being glad to see them, or maybe it was his description of the impromptu picnic on the school lawn in the 30-degree weather to celebrate the coming of spring, and we damn near froze our asses off. And when he refused dessert, even her correcting his table manners seemed right and proper. You don't need to say, I am full, just no thanks is sufficient. Sure, okay, wait, let me write that down, will you? You have got a mind, haven't you? Just retain it. I've told you 50 times, he teased her. Now he stands on the stairs as Cal comes back inside. I'm going to bed, he says. See you in the morning. All through studying? Cal asks. He notes, it's just a quiz in trig. Shouldn't be hard. I'm tired. It was sort of a rough week. What happened? He asks. Your grandmother give you a hard time? No, nothing like that. She was fine. I'm glad you're back, that's all. And he goes to her. Then, without any hesitation, it is what he has come downstairs for, obviously. He bends his head, puts an arm around her in a quick, clumsy embrace. Good night, his wife says thick. He exists swiftly, his face turned away. She sits on the couch, her legs curled under her, the book in her lap. Just as he has left her, she is staring off into space. Then, after a moment, her head drops over her book again, her hair spilling over her shoulder. Her face is hidden from Cal also. Chapter 30. Already I'm thinking about next fall, Janine says. Isn't that dumb? I don't want to go away now. They are sitting on the floor in her living room, their backs against the couch as Conrad picks out the chords on Mike's guitar. Conrad has Mike's cowboy hat on, pulled low over his eyes. I don't want you to go either, he says. Don't you? She reaches up to snatch the hat from his head, but he grabs her wrist. No you don't. He settles the hat more firmly on his head. Why don't you hang around here for another year? Wait for me. I can't, she says. You can't. No, did you write that, Con? It's beautiful. Play it again. It's not anything special, just note patterns. Fooling around, here's a good one. And he plays her the song he has composed upstairs in his bedroom over the past week. He loves doing this, the mathematics of it, organizing the notes into different pictures. She sits watching him, elbows on her knees, chin in her hands. I love it. Let's note it. Okay, I've got some paper. Here, play it again. It's so lovely and clean. He laughs. I've got some pretty dirty ones too. No, I mean it's neat, pleasant and orderly and neat. Those are horrible adjectives. Rapturous, passionate, use those. Pleasant and neat do not make it. He fingers the chords one at a time and she copies them briskly on staff paper. You should write word for this one. I'm not too good at that. You used to write poetry, didn't you? Who told you that? He asks. Listenby? She nods. Are you mad? No, surprised though. How did he happen to tell you? She smiles at him. How do you think? I asked him, I said. Tell me everything you know about Conrad Jarrett. So he did. He laughs. The hell you did. The hell I didn't, she says calmly. You were the mysterious figure I wanted to know about you. Mysterious? I was just scared, that's all. I saw Suzanne in school today. Suzanne? Mostly. She asked me if I was still going out with you. I said yes. Then she asked me if I was serious or was I just having a good time. He looks at her from under the hat. What did you say? I said both. She's crazy about you, Con. I'm sure. She is. She told me she was. She told me that you were the only nice boy in the whole school and she would be very disappointed in me if I were just fooling around with you. I can't believe she said that. She never even talks to me. She's shy. She has a terrific inferiority complex. Tell her to join the club. You tell her. He snorts. That is not my style. Oh, and what is your style? He grins at her. Well, on Friday nights, I perform bakery B and E's and babysit with some twerpy 11-year-old and his sister. That's a joke, isn't it? You performing a B and E, I mean? You who couldn't even say hello in the hall unless I said it first. Hey, that's not true. There were always guys around you, and what was I supposed to do? Oh, sure. Well, at least they were friendly. They paid some attention. I paid attention, he says. I paid a lot of attention in my mind. I used to sneak looks all the time in choir. I like to look at you. To illustrate, he pulls the cowboy hat lower over his eyes. They sit side by side, he playing and she notating, until he is tired of it and stretches his arm back over his head to drop the guitar on the couch. Enough. If you don't write them down, you will forget them. If I forget them, they weren't worth writing down anyway. That isn't true. You certainly don't have a very clever idea of what you do well, she says, and what you don't do well. I don't. He tilts his head. He tilts his the hat back to look at her. But don't I do well? She laughs. I knew you would say that. Okay, you don't accept compliments gracefully, like when I told you how much my mother likes you. I'm just waiting for the rest of it, that's all. My mother likes you. My brother likes you. Thanks for everything, and I'll see you around. Oh, you're hopeless. You really are. But she's not laughing. Instead, she is looking at him with a solemn, wide open expressions. His mouth is suddenly dry, his head feels queerly light. A highway is moving towards him and he is on it, traveling with such force and speed. All his senses open again, he turns towards her, put his arms around her gently. Her mouth opens under his. Her breath is sweet smelling like apples, her eyes closed. The eyelids are small, delicate curves that he touches with his lips, his fingertips. Her tongue is in his mouth, exploring. He cannot concentrate anymore, gather her against him tightly as his groin hardens, spreads warmth through his whole body, his face in the hollow of her neck. He rocks her slowly, gently in his arms. They lie drugged and submerged, facing each other on the bed. Conrad's head is on his arm, one hand curved around her breast, eyes closed, shielding himself from the shining look of her, smooth, pale, peach skin glowing in the light from the hall. His heart floats inside his chest. His skin feels branded everywhere that she has touched him, with fingers as light as bird wings. Comfortably and perfectly tired, yet his mind is engaged, recording bits and pieces, data for assimilation. But later, she moves, drawing closer to him, drawing her arms inside his, her arms against his chest. He opens his eyes to look at her. Cold? He whispers. She nods, and he reaches down to the foot of the bed to pull the blankets over them. Gently, he asks her, because now he is protector against the world, did I hurt you? And with his fingertips caresses around the rounded curve of her breast. No, she shifts her body slightly, and her knees bump against his. I want to tell you something, Con. I'm not, a virgin. Okay. His hand travels over her back, soft angles of shoulder blades, a hollow between. Do you care? No. Do you want me to tell you? You want to? Maybe. I think I would feel better. It's no one I knew here. It was a boy in Akron. We did things. Her voice sinks into a whisper, and he stops his. He must stop his hand moving on her shoulder in order to hear her. After my father moved out, I felt so awful, like it was me who was losing everyone. It was happening to me, not to them. My father tried to talk to me about it, but I made up excuses, reasons for not listening to him. I didn't want to get involved. I didn't want to take sides. But I had already taken sides against them both, and I wouldn't talk about it. So finally, everybody just left me alone. And that hurt too. Only I just pretended I didn't care a damn, not about them or anything else. That's when it happened. She stops to take a breath, and he strokes her gently again. Don't be too nice to me, okay? She whispers. Okay, he says. Why? Because it's not nice, the rest of it. Don't tell me if you don't want to. You don't have to, Jen. No, I want to. I started hanging around, with kids my parents were afraid of. They were wild, I guess. Only not really. They were just stupid. And I was stupid, and I started doing a lot of stupid things with them. She sighs, her voice tired and flat. Nothing interesting, nothing even unusual, just the same old stuff. We smoked, we took pills, we junked around. Sometimes we needed money and kids stole stuff. I had enough money. My dad felt so bad about me by then that he was keeping me well supplied, but I would go with them and steal just for kicks. And then one time we got caught. The manager of the store was going to prosecute. He was furious. He's had it. He called our parents, got them down to the store, and gone. He knew my father. It was awful. My father talked and talked to him, and finally he talked him out of taking us to court. I don't know how he did it. The man said he thought that he might be making a mistake letting us off, but he was doing it anyway. And we were to stay the hell out of this store, period. And my father cried. She stops, suddenly her hand over her face. He holds her tenderly against him. Anyway, she says. At first, I was just so relieved to have gotten out of it that I didn't think about anything else. But then I started to feel sick about myself, about what I was doing to myself, not my mum or dad, but me. I did it. Why? Why did I want to hurt myself like that? So stupid. So stupid. I shouldn't be telling you this. Why not? Because what you must think. I don't think anything, he says. I'm so ashamed. I'm still so ashamed. That's why we moved here, you know. My mother thought it was Akron, but it wasn't Akron. It was me. He shifts his position slightly to ease the pressure of her body across his arm. He kisses her hair, her eyelids, tastes salt, wetness. It makes him want her again, but it is too soon, too feeble. He doesn't want to dilute that first powerful moment, wants to lie still thinking about it. As if she reads his mind, she whispers, let's just talk, okay? And they sit up then, with the sheet pulled up and their backs against the headboard of her bed, holding hands. She turns his arm up, the fingertips of her other hand brush slightly against the scar on his wrist. Did it hurt? No, he says. I don't think so. I don't remember. Would you rather not talk about it? I don't know. I've never talked about it. To doctors, but not to anyone else. Her fingers on the scar send out strange vibrations from nerve endings that are not completely healed. He wonders if they will ever be. Why did you do it? I don't know. It was like falling into a hole, and it keeps getting bigger and bigger. You can't get out. And then all of a sudden it is inside you. It is you. And you are trapped. And it is all over. I know, she says. I know that feeling. She holds his hand slightly. It seems right at that time. What is it that makes hurting yourself seems like the right thing to do? I don't know, he says. I don't even know why I don't feel that way anymore. Listen, she says. I was counting on you for some answers. Can't help you, sorry. Leaning away from her, he reaches down beside the bed, fumbling for the cowboy hat he has dropped there. He squeezes its soft crown, presses the hat low over his eyes. These same questions I ask myself over and over, he drawls. And then I answer myself, I say, how the fuck do I know? She laughs. Why won't you take anything seriously? He lies down flat, the hat over his face. No sense taking the questions seriously if there aren't any answers. Gone. Do you believe people are punished for the things they do? Punished? You mean by God? Yes. I don't believe in God, he says. She lifts the hat up off his face. Not at all? It isn't a question of degree. I don't think either you do or you don't. They are silent for a moment. I believe in God, she says. Okay. She turns towards him and the ends of her hair fall lightly against his chest. What do you believe in? Oh, tennis courts, wallpaper, he says. Floor shoes, Miami Beach. Liar, she says, her arm sliding around his neck. You, he says. You, kissing her. Liar again, but that's nice. And he squeezes her tightly, feeling that sense of calm, of peace slowly gathering, spreading itself within him. He's in touch for good, with hope, with himself. No matter what, Berger is right. The body never lies. That brings us to the end of chapter 30. Chapter 31. She left the telling of it up to him. You are the expert in human relations. You handle it. Said calmly as she was packing, he had felt the accusation behind it. When they talk now, it is to hurl accusation and contradiction at each other. Rebuke, revelation, but it all falls between them. No bridges are formed. The water gets muddier. Solutions do not surface. I don't understand why you're leaving, he says. Because I can't stand the way you look at me. I can't stand that. Poor Beth, poor old you expression on your face. I don't believe you. I don't believe that's it. I'm not looking at you any differently. When you suggested a counselor, she says, that's when I knew. Counseling. I said counseling for both of us. No, you are the one who isn't happy anymore. Can't you see that? You haven't been for a long time. Cal, you go and see a counselor if you want. You do what you need to. What I need, he says, is for us to talk to each other. I want to talk to you, Beth. But when I try, you freeze me out. Well, what do you expect from an emotional cripple? She blazes. That's what you have been trying to tell me, isn't it? That's what you really think of me. I won't have it, Cal. I won't have you wringing your hands over me the way you have over him. And there are too many rooms to which he has no access. Too much that he doesn't understand anymore. If he could know what he used to know, but what did he really know? There is addiction here to secrecy, to a private core within herself that is so much deeper than he ever imagined it to be. He has no such core, at least he cannot find it. If it is there, is it fair to deny her the right to keep it because he hasn't this space, this need? Nightly they argue. Daily she gets up, spending hours at Ovenstia, organizing, supervising, putting plans into operation for the nationally advertised tennis tournament the club is sponsoring. Over there, they think of her as marvelous miracle. That wife of yours, Sarah Murray said to him, I don't know how she does it. Everything organized, down to the last detail. It's marvelous, really. Marvelous miracle, his wife. They have come this far, and no further. In spite of love. He knows there is no love. He knows there is love, but what good is it? It cannot help them anymore. He grabbed her roughly in an argument, wanting to hit her, to knock the stubbornness out of her. Him, the Clark Kent of Samuel Mumford High School, the model of gentleness as he had quoted her, he would never even presume to lay an indecorous hand on her breast in those days. Ah, innocence. Ah, ignorance. And now, what was he trying to do? Brutalize her? Violate her thoughts, interject by force if necessary, his own notion of what was right, what was practical? For he sees something else here, that her outer life is deceiving, that she gives the appearance of orderliness, of a cash register practically about herself, but inside, what he had glimpsed is not order, but chaos, not practicality at all, but stubborn, incredible impulse. The night he had grabbed her, he had shouted in her face, Do you love me, Beth? Stop it, she said. Tell me, I want to know. I feel the same way about you, she said, that I have always felt. You are the one who has changed. Howard and Ellen are thunderstruck, bewildered, and Ray said flatly, I can't believe it, Cal. I mean, Christ, that's a fairy tale marriage. Nancy has been holding you two up as a goddamn example for years. So that is the mystery of it, as others see it. Two intelligent people, why can't they understand each other? Why can't they work out their differences? The point is that it has nothing to do with intelligence or understanding. He sits this morning across the breakfast table from his son who has made breakfast for them both, while outside the sun is shining thinly. Spring is slow in gaining strength this year, the middle of May already. The mornings are still chilly like fall. Want to go outside? Conrad asks. Sure, although he really doesn't want to, shivers in the thin pullover sweater as he sits, his hands around his coffee cup on the stone steps of the patio. Conrad, in Levi's and a t-shirt, remarks about how warm it is. Also remarks that the lilac are in bloom, and isn't this the time they usually fertilize the lawn? Not that he is looking for a job, he would much rather play tennis, but he was just curious. A good opportunity. Start slow. Start with the house. They will not be fertilizing this year. They are planning to sell a house. Sell the house. It is too big for them. That's obvious. It has always been too big, hasn't it? Conrad asks. Right, only now there are other things to spend money on. College expenses next year, some investment he and Ray have been contemplating. The trip that Beth is taking. What trip? Your mother is going away for a while. What do you mean? You mean not with you? No, I can't get away right now. Right now? She's been wanting to go for some time. I don't get it. Who is she going with? No one, he says. She's going to your Uncle Watts for a few weeks and or so, and then leaving for Europe. She wants to go to Greece, maybe to Italy. What is this, Dad? He asks abruptly. Has something happened? No, nothing has. There is nothing definite. No talk of divorce, and to say the words could make it so could force something into existence. Isn't that true? Absurd. Whatever is happening has already happened, maybe years ago. The seeds planted in their separate natures, their background, because all you can do is finally and simply what you can do. I have rented a house in Evanston, down by Centennial Park, near the lake. What does she think about that? That doesn't sound like anything she would even like. There is an uncomfortable pause. The thing is, this trip could last for a while. I'm not sure how long she will be gone. Beautiful, beautiful story. Just a couple of holes in it, so big you could put your fist through them. What are you saying? He asks. What's the deal? When is she planning on leaving? She has left, he says. Stupid idea. He should not have allowed her to do it. And since when do you allow and not allow? She left this morning, before you were up. Why did she do that? Was she in such a hurry? Damn. She couldn't even say goodbye. His voice is bitter. Never mind. I know why. No, you don't. Yeah, I do. And I see your problems too. You can't just come out with it. Can you? First, you have to check around, make sure there aren't any razor blades. That's not funny. You think that's funny? An ugly silence while they look at each other. Then Conrad looks away. No, he says. I'm sorry. You want the truth? I don't know why she left, and neither do you, because a lot of things happened in this world, goddammit. And people don't always know the answers. I'm no authority on her. You are no authority either. Conrad stares at him, stricken. In despair, he hears himself to go on. You are no authority, period. You just think you are. You make the judgment, don't you? But nobody's supposed to make a judgment on you. Do you think that is fair? No, he whispers, his eyes fixed on Cal's face. I don't want you to say anything like that to me again. I don't like jokes about it, Cal says. Dad, I'm sorry. I really am. I mean it. And abruptly the anger recedes, swept away in the familiar paternal desire to blanket and protect. When he was small and he felt that he has been wrongly accused, he would go to the hall and stand on his head at the top of the stairs. I didn't. And Buck would holler. Daddy's gonna do it. He's gonna stand on his head on the stairs again. Make him quit it. Maybe he should do it now. Such a funny, weird little kid he was. There is movement in the grass. He can almost feel the diamond shafts of green pushing upward, displacing the wet, trampled earth. No, I am sorry. I don't know what I'm yelling at you for. No, Conrad says. That's right. You were right. You ought to do that more often. He gives a short laugh. Oh, yeah? No, really. Haul my ass a little. Tell me to shape up. A slight pause, a key change. The way you used to do with him. He looks up in surprise. He needed it. You didn't. You were always so hard on yourself. I never had the heart. Besides, he says, you were the good kid, the easy one to raise. Ah, Dad, don't. It's the truth. You were the one I never worried about. That was the problem. I should have been worrying. I wasn't even listening. The ground is wet and smell of smoke. It feels soft and spongy to his touch. I don't think I was putting out many signals then, Conrad says carefully. You could have done anything. You couldn't have done anything. Maybe not, He gets up and walks to the edge of the patio, hands in his pocket. Behind him, Conrad sighs. Well, so much for what I know, says. I thought that things were getting better. I thought they seemed great. They haven't been great, he says, for some time. What happened, Dad? How did everything fall apart like this? Was it Buck? And another change of key? Was it me, Dad? Is it me now? No, he says wearily. It's nobody. It's nobody's fault. Over and over the same lesson to be learned. It is the same ways things are. Listen, Conrad says. It isn't something like somebody else. God, he's young. I forget sometimes how young he is. Why else do husbands and wives separate? No, he says, nothing like that. And he comes back, sits beside him on the steps again. I told you the truth, he says. She wanted to go away for a while. Beyond that, I don't know. It seems to him that she is like a child who cries for their wound. She wants things to be the way they used to be, only she will not say it, and he cannot. So whose fault is it? And what difference would it make if they could each voice their dreads, their suspicions? Beside him, Conrad says, I used to figure you for a handle on everything. You knew it all even though you grew up alone, with nobody looking after you. I was looked after, he says. Where did you get that idea? Yeah, but nobody was responsible, he insists. Nobody helped you with the decisions. I've thought a lot about that. I really admired you for it. I still do. Well, don't admire people too much, he says, tossing the remains of his coffee into the bushes. They disappoint you sometimes. I'm not disappointed, Conrad says. I love you, man. He winces and his throat is tight, his eyes filled with sudden tears. I love you too. It is awkward having all this between them. It bumps clumsily against the sentences, pushing them out of meaning, out of order. Painful, the problem he has with these particular words. They threaten to overpower him, cut off his breathing. He hooks an arm around his son's neck and is at once caught in a fierce embrace. He smooths the dark head wedged against his shoulder, brushes the hair aside at the back of his neck to touch bare skin. Conrad pulls away, straightening himself, arms on his knees, head down. You think she'll be back soon? I don't know, he says. You think she's coming back at all? Yeah, of course. Of course she is. At all, God. That is not a thought he needs to handle today, and he will not, that's that. She'd better, Conrad says. He wipes his hand swiftly over his eyes. I'm a lousy cook. No need for any more words. The sun is warm on his back. He could fall asleep here, maybe he will, waiting for whatever comes next. Epilogue. The house looks the same to him, the red maple, tinged from a late August frost. Its branches extending across the drive is the same size as he remembered it. Somehow he has expected change. He parks underneath the tree and gets out of the car, nervous. Now that he is here, he said his goodbye to Berger today. Maybe this is too much of a good thing. Berger has raised his arm in the familiar gesture of confusion and benediction. Listen, you're my prize pupil. You know that? How about if I use you in one of my ads? Hey, don't start depending on me, he warned. Berger just laughed. If I ever go to Mange, you be sure to get me to a good dermatologist, you hear? His sweater bagging and flapping about his hips, his hair floating, he has never known what to expect of this guy. He had tried then to thank him properly. I want you to know, he said, that I revised my original opinion and gave you a 9. My lucky day, Berger said. Remember the rip-off man? The guy who messed up my office? I heard from him too. He gave me a 7. They laughed and Conrad issued the invitation. The house is only 6 or 7 blocks from here. You ought to stop. I mean, if you do that. What, visit friends? Yeah, I do it occasionally. Hey, you can do the same, you know. And right then he had gotten grabbed. Missing him already. He had taken off fast before he acted like some goddamn 6-year-old who just fell off his bike or something. Now, standing on Lesenby's front porch, he has that same funny feeling in the pit of his stomach. He half hopes he won't be home. He probably won't. It has been so long, he has no idea what Lesenby is doing with himself these days. A tall blonde girl answers his ring. Hair is changed. At last, Lisenby's sister, Katie, all grown up. Yes, she asks. Then, Connie, oh my gosh, Ma, guess who's here? They beat at him. Katie and her mother, and he is suddenly overcome with shyness. Joe around? He's out and back, I think, Mrs. Lazenby says. At least he was a few minutes ago. I'll go see. He moves off to the porch, off of the porch and around the house to the backyard. Lazenby is practicing chip shots into a tree hole. Forward press, Conrad advises. Lazenby looks up, then he lowers his head, steadying himself, dropping the shot neatly into the hole. How's it going? Conrad asks. Okay, fine. He leans the 9 iron against the tree. How about you? Good. I heard from Jen that you moved. Yeah, to Evanston. You like it? It's different. You lock your bike in your bedroom with you at night. Then he laughs. No, I'm kidding. I like it fine. We have got a house over near the Big U in case you want to drop by sometime. Yeah, maybe I will. He scratches an arm contemplatively. So where will you go to school this fall? Evanston Township. I took some courses this summer. I'll be through in January. That's good. They look at each other. Conrad says, I've been thinking. Good. Lisenby nods approval. I'm thinking I would like to beat your ass again at golf. That's interesting, Lisenby says. Considering you haven't beaten it yet, what makes you think you can? That swing I just saw. Lisenby laughs. There is a sudden awkward silence. So, Conrad says, how about it? You want to play? I don't know, Lisenby says. Ma's got a pile of things lined up for me to do today. Okay, he backs off at once. Next week, maybe. Call me, or I can call you. You don't want me to try and get out of them, huh? I mean, shit, it's worth asking. He grins. Yeah, ask. He waits in the backyard while Lisenby goes inside. He studies the shades of the green in the backyard, light and shadow that edge the lawn. Those sharp, precise measurements signifying order and other things that make him feel good. The clean flight of the ball on a good drive, the graceful blue and orange swallows that dip and swerve across the fairways. Gesture. He's learning to interpret them now. In a letter that she wrote to his grandmother, she said, the Aegon is bluer than the Atlantic and rough and bumpy. It looks just the way the boys drew it on the funny school maps. For she had saved them all, the maps, the papers, and a construction paper valentine trimmed with Kleenex lace that he had made for her, and packed them away in a box he had found in the basement when they had moved out. Do you save stuff like that if it means nothing to you? Last year, another time dimension, he had often punished her in his mind. They tortured us, just for being there, mostly at night with boiling water from the ceiling. I always slept with the covers over my head, casual and deliberate lies to ease his own hurt. A window opens behind him and Lesenby says, Ma says it's okay. She says first you got to come in, have some peanut butter toast. She wants to rap to you. He looks up at the window as Lesenby rolls his eyes. Mothers. He grins. Be right there. He will see her when she comes home. Maybe drive over to his grandmother's house some morning and say hello. Just hello, nothing important. No point in it anyway, because she knows it all. Knows just as he does that it is love, imperfect and unordered, that keeps them apart, even as it holds them somehow together. Knows also that there are no boiling water, no rats either. He follows the sound of Lisenby's voice. Hey, anybody seen my golf hat? Katie, you seen my golf hat, damn it. He picks up the 9 iron, swinging it lightly through the grass as he walks towards the house. That brings us to the end of the book, Ordinary People. It did sound like it did end like that. Okay, no more. It was beautiful towards the end. I liked today's reading. I did like it was nice, good, and the fact that they showed that his mother did need time. They didn't The book didn't show her perspective at all, what she is going through. She did mention that, and it is her way of like ordering things so that she has some control. Like they have had problems with letting go and they just kept in control. She was doing the same, and she was also going through her own grief. It was nice towards the end. I didn't like the writing, of course, like I have mentioned during the live streams, but yeah, it was in all a good story, a good portrayal of what has happened, how grief can grip you, how you handle, how you go through it, everything. It was nice, a good read. Well, that brings us to the end of the book. If you have liked, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Also, happy Valentine's Day. Today is the 14th February. And yeah, if you have not subscribed, do subscribe. Bye bye for now. Up to the next reading. Bye. Keep reading. Take care.